Hello, everybody. I'm the Worldsmith. Today, we're going to talk about limitations versus powers. As usual, I'm going to frame the conversation real quick so we're all on the same page. Limitations is what we can't do, and powers are what you can do. Okay, I feel stupid, but we're done. We're going to go a little bit deeper into that, though, and into the purposes that each of these two things, limitations and powers, serve. So, without any further ado, let's jump in. Now, at the simplest level, powers are what magic and characters are capable of. So, for instance, we know that Thor from Marvel is capable of controlling thunder and lightning to some extent, among other things. An extremely high power level contributes to feelings of excitement that you would need for power fantasy, where somebody is projecting themselves into the story and then living vicariously through a character. Normally, this serves younger males. But video games use this commonly, probably as a result of most of their audience being younger men. Now, a lower power level will generally contribute to a sense of earthboundness and serves to keep characters relatable emotionally. Although this is not mutually exclusive. You can have a emotionally relatable character in a high power level setting. It's just generally easier if the character has more in common with the average reader. Now, an interesting thing is that a low power hero with a high power villain brings a lot of drama and tension, as well as a sense of joy and accomplishment upon their victory. Now, this is part of why some conflict is tense and exciting and others is not so much, but there's a lot more that goes into it, and we'll get into that as well. Now, a notable example of this low power main character and high power villain is found in the Dark Souls games, where your player character, is typically very low power in comparison to the boss's extremely high levels of power. You get hit once by some of those things and it's over. That delivers a monstrous level of tension and, as a result, a tremendous measure of pride, and their accomplishments and victories are very satisfying when you do finally manage to beat that boss that you've been stuck on. This will also happen to various extents in the world of books if the reader is involved enough with the characters, and that, my friends, is the goal. Now, on to limitations. Limitations, at the most basic level, are the opposites of powers. They are what characters in magic cannot do. Now, like powers, however, limitations serve a greater narrative purpose than just being what you can't do. The power differential that I discussed before about Dark Souls draws its tension partially from limitations, and it has to do with the character's comparatively limited ability. But that's not all it is. Limitations are generally more important than powers for the delivery of tension and suspense and interest, especially when the power level is really high. Limitations become that much more important. Now, the moments when the hero might not pull through because the antagonist attacks some weakness or exploits a limitation, that has a tremendous dramatic effect. The classic example of this is any Superman story. The story becomes really exciting when some villain brings kryptonite into the picture or his code of ethics is personally challenged. Think of how emotionally wrenching it is when Superman in the Man of Steel movie has to kill General Zod. It goes against all of his core values, and that made that moment really powerful. But for a character like Marvel's The Punisher, big deal, he killed somebody. He does that all the time. It's important for Superman because he doesn't do that. Now, all this to say that putting limits on your magic and your characters accordingly is of tremendously greater importance than assigning power alone in good storytelling, or really in great storytelling. Now, connecting this with the previous video, limitations must be clearly defined in hard magic systems, and while they're still important in softer magic systems, they're generally not nearly as crucial or critical. There needs to be something, but you don't necessarily have to tell the audience. Anyway, carrying on. So, as you can see, powers and limitations are two sides of the same coin. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be directly proportional to one another. A given system may have many various powers and one or two big limitations. A good example of that sort of thing can be found in Full Metal Alchemist. In both the show and in the manga, alchemy, which for our purposes is a form of magic, has numerous capabilities, but only two limitations. You cannot create something out of nothing, and you cannot attempt human transmutation. The simplified short version of what that means to people who have not watched the show or read the manga is you can't bring people back to life, no necromancy, and no playing God. So what's important is not the number and strength of your rules and powers, but how they intermingle to bring the correct balance of tension, interest, investment, etc., and ultimately bring the best story to your audience. Now, if your desire is to deliver exciting power fantasy, bring the according powers to bear that you need to accomplish that purpose. Only ensure that your limitations in that system are not broken without good reason and appropriate consequences. If you want the story to be down to earth because you feel it helps readers relate to the characters, you might look at reducing the scope of the powers that they would have access to, and alternatively emphasize the limitations on those powers that do exist. Now, there's plenty of flexibility in how you can approach this problem, and that is up to you to decide as an author. In the end, the solution that you craft must serve your ends as an author. Find a balance between your powers and your limitations that will suit your needs. Powers must have some form of restriction in order to keep the story interesting, and limitations cannot be forgotten, but don't necessarily have to be complex or very numerous. Bringing these concepts together well is your job as an author. But keep in mind this very important principle. Practice leads to mastery. If you don't do it, you don't practice it, you're going to have a hard time implementing it well when it comes time to write your real stories, your big stories. Anyway, thank you for watching The Worldsmith today. If you have any questions or you'd like to discuss something, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll be very engaged. I would love to hear from you. If you like what you saw and you look forward to learning more, please click the pin and anvil over here to my right, your left, in order to subscribe. You can even hit the bell if you want to make sure you don't miss a video. Now, farewell for now.